Hi class, this is Dr. Karsten, and today I am going to go over Lesson 5, and this is in Module 5 for Grade 4 in EngageNY Math. So for today's lesson, it's going to actually be very similar to yesterday's lesson. In yesterday's lesson, we were taking fractions and we were decomposing them, so pulling them apart into smaller pieces, and then finding equivalent fractions. So for example, in yesterday's lesson, if I wanted to show that 1/2 was equal to 2/4, the way that we did it was we drew a tape diagram. And first I would have to show 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide my tape diagram, which they told us in the problems was equal to 1 whole. And then I'm going to bracket off the half that I have. Now I need to shade that in. Make sure that you always shade in what you have. So that's represented by the numerator. So this numerator is 1, so I'm shading in one of my boxes. So then what we had to do is we had to figure out how are we going to divide this up to make fourths. And one thing that we said to ourselves was 2 times what number would get me to 4. And that's what we were looking at right here. So when I did that, 2 times what number, I would say to myself, oh, 2 times 2. I also could have done division. 4 divided by 2 gave me what number? So now I know I have to divide each one of these boxes in half in order to make fourths. So we put the dotted line down the middle of each of them. And now I know that I have 1/4 here, and I have another 1/4 here. And so what we said to ourselves was that this was 2/4. And we just showed that 1/2 is the same thing as 2/4, that they're equivalent fractions. Now for today's lesson, we're going to do it a little bit differently. So I'm going to make a diagram. But for this one, when I do this, I'm going to make it much taller than we were making it yesterday. And what I want to do is I want to start out by first showing that 1/2. So I'm going to divide this in half again. And again, I want to bracket that off and show that this is 1/2, so anyone who looks at this knows what I'm doing, and I have to shade it in. But in today's lesson, instead of turning this 1/2 into fourths by cutting each of these in half this way, I am actually just going to go ahead and I'm going to cut across horizontally instead. So I'm going to take this 1/2, and I already know I have to turn it into 2 pieces to make fourths, and I'm going to cut it up this way. So now you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's pretend that they're perfectly equal. So I have 4 equal pieces here that I've divided this up into or split it up into. So now what you can see is that this 1/2 could also be actually 1, 2 out of 4, or 2/4. And that's how this lesson is different today. And then we can put that underneath here and show that that is actually 2/4. So that's the big idea for this lesson, is that instead of putting the dotted lines, we're going to cut across. We're going to go horizontally. So instead of vertical dotted lines, we're going to put in a horizontal line. We're going to cut the pieces up a little differently. So let's jump right into one of our problems for today. So if I flip this over, or move it out of the way, here's our first problem. This is the one. I'm actually going to start us in problem number 2. I think that it's a better problem for us to start with. And for my class, your homework is going to be to finish out problems 2 and to do problem 3, which is just one problem in there. So if we take a look at this, let me straighten it out for us. It says draw area models, and I didn't want to mention that we're doing area models just yet, but basically to show the decomposition represented by the number sentence below. Represent the decomposition as a sum of unit fractions and as a multiplication sentence. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's just first focus on drawing this 1/2. Now we just did it, so it should be pretty easy. And then turning it into 3/6. And those are equivalent fractions. They're the same thing. They're equal to each other. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to draw this box. And remember, we're going to make this one a lot taller than yesterday's. And then I have to show that 1/2. So again, the denominator tells me the number of pieces that I'm cutting this up into, so I'm going to cut it up into 2 pieces. And then my numerator is going to show how many pieces I have. So I'm going to go ahead and shade in what I have. And I'm not doing a great job shading. There we go. Okay, so you can see that this is representing 1/2, and I have to bracket that off for this. So now what I want to do is I want to show how I can turn this into 3/6. So first I have to think to myself, how am I going to turn 2, this denominator, into 6? What am I going to do? 2 times what number is going to be equal to 6? I could also actually, since they gave us our numerators, I could work with the numerators too, and I could say 1 times, oops, I've gone out of frame, sorry. 1 times what number is equal to 3? So you can either use your numerators or your denominators to try and work this out. So, or you could divide. You could say 6 divided by 2 gives me what number, or 3 divided by what number gives me 1. So I think it's a pretty easy one for us to see. 1 times 3 is 3, or 2 times 3 is 6. That's nice and easy. So now what I know is that I have to divide each of these into 3 pieces. I have to split them into 3 equal pieces. So I'm going to show that by making horizontal lines today. So instead of going and cutting it down vertically and cutting each of those into 3 pieces, we're going to cut them horizontally. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line there and a line there. So I've made 3 equal sections in each of these. And now what I can do is I can see that my new denominator is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that my new numerator, in other words, the ones that are shaded, it's what I have, is going to be 3. So here I'm going to put 3/6. So that covers the first part of this problem where we're going to model it. And again, we're not using the tape diagram today, we're doing it a little differently. So now that we've modeled it, we have to go on to what the rest of it says. And it says, represent the decomposition as a sum of unit fractions. Let's just stop right there. Remember that a unit fraction just means that you have a 1 in the numerator. So what I want to do is I first want to show what I started with, which was that 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. And then I want to show what is that equal to when I write it as unit fractions. Well, each piece is a unit of this entire thing. This would be unit fraction, that's a unit fraction, that's a unit fraction. And what I know is that each one of these is going to have a denominator of 6, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, and a numerator of 1 because it's a unit fraction. So if I were to write it, I could show it as being that this is 1/6, this is 1/6, this is 1/6. So we're going to go ahead and show that, and they're all added together to make that half. So I'm going to say 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6, and now I can say that that is equal to 3/6. So that is how we're going to show or represent the decomposition, so pulling apart of that 1/2 into 3/6 using my unit fractions. Now, the other thing they want us to do is they want us to show it as a multiplication sentence. So again, I'm going to start by showing what we started with, which was 1/2. And then I'm going to show that I added 1/6 3 times. And since I'm adding 1/6 3 times, I could just say 3 times 1/6. And then, as we know, we can multiply across the top and the bottom when we have a whole number, and we just say 3 times 1 is 3, and we're going to keep our 6, because really this is 3/1, so 1 times 6 would be 6. Or I can just look over here and say, oh, it's equal to 3/6. Or I can say 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 is 3/6. Okay, so let's do one more of these for you. Let's go ahead and let us maybe try a different type of a number. Let's try thirds. So I'm going to move this up, and we're going to take a look at D. So again, I'm first going to take a look and start with my first fraction, which is 1/3. And so what I now know is that I need to make my original model here, but this time I'm going to cut it up into thirds, into 3 pieces. Again, my denominator tells me how many equal parts the whole thing was cut up into or divided into. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. They're not quite equal, but we're going to pretend they are. And I have 1, 2, 3. So that covers my denominator. Now I have to shade in one of those because my numerator is 1, and that tells me how many pieces I have or how many pieces are shaded in. So this is 1/3. I need to bracket that off. A lot of you have been forgetting to do this and show that that's 1/3. Sorry, my handwriting is really small, but that's 1/3. So the next thing that I need to do now is I have to think how I'm going to turn 1/3 into 2/6. Easiest way, look at how your numerator went from 1 to 2. I know 1 times 2 is 2. Does that work for my denominator? 3 times 2 is 6. It does work. So what I'm learning from that, when I do that, and I'll just use one of those, I'll say 3 times what is equal to 6? Well, 3 times 2. So that means I have to cut each one of these in half. And again, we're going to do it this way. We're going to go horizontally. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to cut it in half. And look at that. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces, and that's what we're going for with our denominator. We want to make that 6. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm going to write my denominator right here and show that it's a 6. And in the numerator, I have now 1, 2 pieces. And there's my little bracket. Very little. Okay, so that's the first part. We drew it. The next thing we have to do is that we have to show, represent the decomposition as a sum of unit fractions. So again, I'm going to show how I made that 1/3 into a whole bunch of sixths. And if I take a look here, I can see that 1/3 is equal to 1, 2, 6. Remember, each one of these is like 1/6, or is 1/6. So I'm going to go ahead and write that. It's 1/6 plus 1/6, and that's easy, 1 plus 1, so that's going to be 2/6. Remember, this is kind of like a label. It's telling us how big each piece is. Okay, so now that I've done that, it should get pretty easy for me to go ahead and write the multiplication sentence. So again, I'm going to say what I started with, and then what I want to show is I want to show how I could have multiplied this out instead of adding. Because remember that multiplication is just repeated addition. So here I added 1/6 2 times. 2 times means I can say 2 times 1/6. And then we can go ahead and finish that out by showing that that's equal to 2/6 also. And remember, 2 times 1 is 2. This is really 2 over 1, so it would be 1 times 6 is 6. Okay, I hope that that was clear, boys and girls, and that you're going to understand how to do this lesson. If your teacher is having you do the first problem in this problem set, don't worry, it's pretty easy. It's the same thing. I just felt that starting in problem number 2 was going to be better for my class. So for homework, you need to finish out all of this page and do problem number 3 as well. It's just one page of work, nice and easy day. I hope this was clear. Have a great evening, and I will see you all tomorrow in my Google Classroom. Have a good night.